There were truths everyone knew, but no one spoke aloud. For instance, the Duke of Windham was married, but he was not happy. Or at least, that was what was said. Lord James Windham, 34 years old, the 8th heir to the Duchy of Windham, 4 castles in the north of England, boundless land in the south, and in the heart of London, a residence that stood like the very embodiment of elegance itself. Money. Yes, but even that word fell short. The Windham fortune was no longer merely wealth. It was an accumulation across generations, a weight, a responsibility, a chain. A title. Certainly. But what made James Windham who he was neither his wealth nor his title. When he entered a room, everyone felt the air change. How to describe it? He was tall, yes. Dark-haired with gray eyes, but these physical details were the least important part of the story. The essential truth was this: James Windham carried himself as though a room required his permission to exist. Arrogant. Perhaps. But something beyond arrogance, a deep ingrained coldness. As though the world expected things of him, and he had grown weary of carrying that expectation, yet could not set it down. London admired him, feared him a little, and both sentiments were entirely justified. As for his wife, Lady Eleanor Windham, formerly Lady Eleanor Ashby, the only daughter of a baron, was a very different kind of person. Was she beautiful? The answer depended on who was asking. To London's most ardent young officers, perhaps not, because Eleanor's beauty was not dazzling. It did not strike, did not enchant at first glance. But someone attentive, someone truly attentive, would notice. The way her light brown hair caught the candlelight. The strange depth of her eyes, as though when she looked at you, she was seeing something just beyond you. The way her voice never rose when she spoke, yet every word landed exactly where it should, lingering in the air, leaving one thinking. Society had defined her in a single word: docile. And every time Eleanor heard that word, and she had heard it often, she smiled inwardly. Because docile was the most incorrect word that could ever have been used for her. But no one knew that. Not yet. Their marriage, 3 years earlier in the autumn of 1808, had been precisely the kind everyone expected, an arrangement. The Duchy of Windham did not need money, but it did need reputation. James's father had left behind debts, whispers, stains. The Ashby barony, on the other hand, did not need reputation. It needed money. Eleanor's father was a good man but a disastrous investor, and his family stood quietly on the edge of ruin. The arrangement was simple. Windham wealth would erase Ashby debts. The clean Ashby name would lend a certain brightness to Windham's tarnish. And at the intersection of these two calculations stood two people. James and Eleanor. Neither had chosen it. Neither had objected. And precisely that, was where the true tragedy of the story began. Because not objecting did not mean accepting. It meant that what was carried in silence would, eventually, be laid down somewhere, unexpectedly, at an unexpected moment. 3 years. For 3 years, Eleanor Windham had been the model wife in this city. The household was managed flawlessly. Invitations were arranged perfectly. Dinner was ready at the proper hour every evening. When James's associates were entertained, Eleanor said exactly the right things, no more, no less, always in perfect measure. At society gatherings, when they stood side by side, no one could look at them and say, "This marriage is failing." But no one knew how silent that corridor became once the doors were closed at night. 2 rooms. 2 separate worlds. And between them, A vast distance, unspoken, unnamed, barely acknowledged to exist. James would return from work. Eleanor would already be with her book. Eleanor would be in the garden. James would not yet be home. At the table they sat side by side, like two strangers sharing a space, politely, quietly, tolerating one another's presence. Sometimes Eleanor would ask questions. Small ones. How was Parliament today? What did you think of Sir Harrington's proposal? Or, and this was the bravest one, simply, you look tired. James always answered briefly. Sometimes a single word. Sometimes a sentence. Then he would rise from the table. For 3 years. Until that morning. It was late March. London had not yet awakened, at least not politely. Its lower layers had been active since 4 in the morning, vendors, bakers, carriage drivers. But the mansions of Mayfair still slept. Curtains drawn, doors shut, the night still lingering. The young maid on the second floor of Wyndham House. Her name was Betsy. She was 16, newly employed. Had only one thing in mind as she stepped into the upper corridor that morning, lighting the fireplaces. As she did every morning. As she always did, without incident. But that morning, something went wrong. The door was ajar. The Duke's room. The largest room upstairs, always closed. Ajar. Betsy did not stop to think. She was 16, and curiosity always defeated caution. She pushed the door, just a little, no more than the width of a finger. And what she saw would return to her mind every morning for the rest of her life. 2 silhouettes. One was the Duke of Wyndham. The other was not Lady Eleanor. Betsy closed the door, walked down the stairs, entered the kitchen, and there by the stove she stood with trembling hands. What should she do? Should she tell? To whom? How? But in London one thing was known. Even when servants did not speak, news traveled. Mansions did not leak, but people did. A glance, a whisper, a deliberate silence. Sometimes these said more than the longest conversations. The news spread before morning tea. By luncheon, it had reached 5 drawing rooms. By afternoon tea, the ladies walking in Hyde Park already knew. By evening, it was no longer even a whisper. It was open, comfortable, curious conversation. Because within the aristocracy, scandal could sound sweeter than music. Wyndham. Again. Do we know who it is this time? What will his wife do? Remain silent again. What else can the poor woman do? But Lady Eleanor did nothing that day. At 8 in the morning she came down to breakfast, at her usual hour. She lifted her silver spoon with quiet precision, drank her tea, spread butter on her toast, looked out at the garden, the pale late March sunlight touching the walls of the house with that uncertain early spring glow. Then she rose, put on her hat, drew on her gloves, and stepped outside. She watered her roses. She did not say a single word. And it was this silence, this immense, deliberate, calculated silence, that unsettled London far more than the Duke of Wyndham ever could. Because everyone expected a scene. Tears. Anger. When pain was expressed outwardly, it could be understood, categorized, pitied, or scorned, but in either case known. Eleanor offered nothing. Not her pain, not her anger, not even what she thought. And London feared what it could not understand. That evening the house was quiet. James returned late. Later than usual. Perhaps he was avoiding something. Perhaps he was thinking. Perhaps both. As he stepped through the door, the familiar darkness of the house greeted him. The same candles, the same furniture, the same scent of lavender, beeswax, and paper. Everything was the same, except one thing. That night the table had not been set. For the first time in 3 years, James stood for a long moment at the doorway of the dining room. He looked at the empty table, and for the first time in his life, he understood how heavy an absence, real, tangible, almost physical, could be. He went upstairs. As he passed Alina's door, candlelight seeped from beneath it. She was there, awake, but James did not move toward the door. He raised his hand for a moment, just a moment, and then lowered it. He went to his own room. And that night the Duke of Windham, one of the most powerful men in England, a royal advisor, heir to 8 generations, felt, for the first time, truly imprisoned. Though he did not yet fully understand it. Understanding, after all, is sometimes the slowest thing to arrive. James Windham did not sleep that night. This was not unusual for him. On parliamentary days, before important decisions, during the final months of his father's illness, sleeplessness had long been an acquaintance. But on those nights, his mind worked. It calculated, planned, arranged words in precise order. Even sleeplessness had been productive. This night was different. His mind did not work. It turned. The same images, the same sounds, the same moment, again and again, without end, without exhaustion. Lying on his back in the dark, eyes fixed on the pale ceiling, James Windham found himself inside a feeling he did not recognize. Shame. Raw, unrefined, impossible to hide. And yet the strange part, the part that made him almost laugh bitterly when he realized it, was that the shame did not come from Sophia Ashford. Not from that woman, not from that morning, not from the scandal. It came from Alina's face. Or rather, from the absence of anything in it. The expression he had seen at the table, in the garden, in that brief moment in the corridor. Because there had been no anger in Alina's face. No fragility. No tears. Nothing. And it was precisely that nothingness that began to hollow him from within. You must understand this. James Windham had spent his life accustomed to women's reactions. That sounds worse than it is, but in truth, it was less arrogance than habit. His mother shouted when she was angry. His sister wept when she was hurt. His fiancée, his former fiancée, Sophia, would leave the room, slam the door, refuse to speak for days. Even the most composed ladies he knew at court allowed something to slip, a glance, a shift in tone, a posture. People functioned that way. Emotion gathered inside and then found a way out. Alina did not leak. For 3 years she had not, and James had seen it, but he had never thought about it. Because he had not wanted to. Because Alina's silence made things easier for him. It eased his conscience, freed him from questioning. If Alina was not upset, then everything was fine. If Alina did not complain, then the arrangement was working. But that night in the still, lifeless quiet, staring at the ceiling, James understood something. Alina's silence had never meant that everything was fine. It meant she had stopped trying to tell him something, long ago. It was 2, perhaps 3 in the morning when James rose. Lying in bed had become unbearable. He stood, crossed to the window. London stretched below him, the street lamps glowing through a yellow haze, the distant sound of a carriage passing, nothing else. The city slept. Or at least pretended to, something London had always been adept at blurring. He stood there for a long time. How could he describe what he felt? Was it regret? The word felt insufficient. Regret belonged to things one had done, but what pressed on him now was as much what he had not done. Words unsaid. Doors unopened. Faces not truly seen. For 3 years, Alina had sat at that table every morning. She had been present every evening, stood beside him at every gathering. And in all that time, James had never once truly looked at her. He had seen her, yes. Physically, she had been there. He had been aware of her presence. But looking was something else entirely. To look was to wonder what the other person carried. To look was to care. To look meant in its simplest form, you matter. James had never looked at Alina that way. And now, too late, far too late, he felt the weight of it. Toward dawn, James sat at his desk. He considered writing a letter to Alina. What would he write? An apology. An explanation. The words refused to come together. He formed sentences, erased them. Tried again, and again they felt wrong. Because he had realized something. Every sentence he might write would be for himself. To feel better. To ease his conscience. To convince himself he had done something. Not for Alina. And that realization, that small yet enormous difference, made him put the pen down. He stared at the blank page for a long time. Then rose, crossed to the shelf, and took down his oldest book, the one his father had given him, its edges worn, its pages yellowed. He did not open it. He simply held it. Because sometimes one needs to hold on to something, even if it means nothing. And there, as the first light of morning began to slip through the curtains, James Wyndham admitted something to himself, quietly, in a way he would never say aloud. He had not deserved Alina. He had never deserved her. Yes, it had been an arrangement, money for a name for money. But Alina had brought something into that arrangement that James had never accounted for. Herself. Her curiosity, her intelligence, those small questions she asked once a day at the table, which he now understood had never been small at all. They had been moments of reaching. Each time she had extended a hand, and each time he had ignored it, rising from the table, leaving the room. For 3 years. Until she stopped reaching. But when had that happened? James tried to think. To find the moment, the last time Alina had reached out. But he could not. Because it had not been a single moment. It had been gradual, quiet, insidious. One morning she simply stopped asking, and James had not noticed. Not that day. Not the next. Perhaps weeks later, something had shifted in some distant corner of his mind, but he had closed that corner, turned to other matters. Now he opened it again, and found it empty. When the day fully broke, James rose, washed his face, and dressed. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary morning. But inside, for the first time in his life, James Wyndham felt himself standing at the edge of something. The edge of what? He did not know exactly. But he could sense that something had changed, or that something needed to change. And those two things, feeling and necessity, did not always lead to the same door. He stepped into the corridor. As he passed Alina's door, he stopped. It was closed. Silent. It was early. Perhaps she was still asleep. Or perhaps she was awake, reading. Or standing at the window, looking at the garden, thinking about her roses or something else entirely. James did not know. And that too was something. He did not know what the woman he had lived with for 3 years thought about in the mornings. He raised his hand. He was about to touch the door, just to knock, just to say Alina, just to begin something. But he lowered it. Not yet. He did not yet know what he would say. And to knock on Alina's door with empty words, this, at least, he understood, would be the greatest injustice he could do to her. He went downstairs, stepped outside, walked into the cold air of a London morning, aimless, without direction. And behind him, on the second floor of the house, Eleanor Wyndham sat watching the morning light filter through the curtains. A book rested in her hands, but she was not looking at the page. She had heard the footsteps pause at her door. Had she waited? Perhaps. Once she would have. But now, do you know what she felt as James's footsteps moved away? Nothing. And that nothing, that deep, exhausted emptiness that no longer even hurt, was heavier for Eleanor than all of James's scandals, all his coldness, all those empty nights. Because once she had been able to feel pain. And pain, at least, meant feeling. Now there was only an ending. And as Eleanor Wyndham lowered her eyes to the page, she thought, enough. In London, the easiest way to know a woman was to misunderstand her. It sounds like a paradox, but consider this. In a city, in a society, in a class where rules are written for women, dictating how they should appear, speak, sit, even think, then truly seeing a woman requires far more effort. One must look beneath the surface. And the aristocracy of London had never made a habit of doing so. For that reason, Eleanor Wyndham had been misread by everyone for 10 years. And this, strangely, was her greatest advantage. Let us return to the beginning. Much earlier, Eleanor Ashby was 8 years old when she lost her mother. She remained with her father, Baron Ashby, a kind-hearted man who spent his life trying to do the right thing, yet never quite arriving at the right outcomes. He was affectionate toward his child, that must be said. But affection was not always enough. Sometimes a child needed something beyond affection, to be seen. Eleanor was not seen. Her father loved her, but did not understand her. The servants cared for her, but did not truly notice her. The neighboring children played with her, but sooner or later they all said the same thing. Eleanor is very quiet. Eleanor is strange. Why does Eleanor always watch? Because Eleanor watched. From a young age, with an instinct that seemed inevitable, she observed. What happened when her father grew angry? How did his voice change? On which word did it tremble? When a servant lied, how did their eyes shift? When a lady was displeased, how did the corner of her mouth harden? Eleanor recorded these things. In her mind, in an invisible ledger. And over time, that ledger filled. Its pages overflowed. By the time Eleanor entered a room, she could read everyone within it, within minutes, sometimes seconds. Who was tense? Who was happy but hiding it? Who despised someone but concealed it behind politeness? Who was saying the opposite of what they truly thought? Was this a talent? A defense mechanism? Perhaps both. But whatever it was, by the age of 16, Eleanor Ashby possessed one of the sharpest minds in London. And no one knew. Because Eleanor did not speak, at least not in a way anyone could hear. Silence was her armor. And armor had a flaw. It also imprisoned what lay within. When she entered a ballroom for the first time at 19, Eleanor had read the entire room within 5 minutes. The tension between the elderly countess and the young officer in the corner. The man needed money. The woman knew it and played with that knowledge. The silent rivalry between two sisters by the window, who would dance first, who would attract more attention. And in the far corner, half in shadow, standing alone, him. James Wyndham. At the time, he was not yet a duke. His father was still alive. But the weight he carried was already visible. In his shoulders, his eyes, the way he stood. Eleanor looked at him and saw one thing. A tired man. Powerful, yes. Controlled, yes. But deeply to the bone tired. As though he had been carrying a burden for years and had never learned, or had never been allowed, to set it down. That night, as Alina watched him, she thought, "This man has imprisoned himself." And soon after, she herself was placed into a fitting cell beside him, through the marriage arrangement. Quietly, gently, without tears. The first months of the marriage became a period of observation for Alina. A new house, new rules, new people, servants, associates, neighbors, the endless machinery of London society. Alina watched them all, read them all, recorded them in her invisible ledger. And most of all, she watched James. In the first month, she learned that James rose early, ate quickly, withdrew to his study, and seemed to wait for a reason to leave it, as though the world beyond that room were something to be endured. In the second month, she learned that he was most at ease when alone. If you entered a room quietly enough, you could see it, the way his shoulders dropped, the way his breathing slowed. As though the gaze of others exhausted him, diminished him. By the third month, Alina learned something else. The most important thing. Everyone believed James preferred solitude. Perhaps he believed it himself. But after watching him long enough, Alina saw the truth. James did not want to be alone. He simply knew how to be. And those were very different things. At the end of that third month, Alina made a decision. A small one. One no one would notice, one that would seem meaningless from the outside. She began asking questions at the table. Small questions. Non-threatening, unburdening, not demanding answers. How was Parliament today? Not pressure. What did you think of Sir Harrington's proposal? Genuine curiosity, because Alina followed politics, read thought. You look tired, not criticism, merely observation. Another way of saying, I see you. Each time, James answered briefly. Rose from the table. Left. But Alina did not give up. Not immediately. Because she had learned, through years of observation, that people did not open their doors all at once. Especially those who had kept them closed for a long time. They required time. Consistency. And patience, true patience without expectation, without demand for return. Alina was patient. For 6 months, 9 months, a year. And then, sometime in the middle of the second year, she could not recall exactly when, she woke one morning and realized something. She no longer wanted to ask. Not exactly a loss of curiosity, the interest remained. But each time she asked those questions, she felt something inside her twist. Like an old wound. A little more each time. And Alina Ashby, the woman who had spent 10 years observing herself as closely as she observed others, understood. Continuing was no longer courage. It was harm. That was the day she began to fall silent. Truly silent. At the table she no longer asked. At gatherings, she stood beside him but expected nothing. At night she withdrew to her room, not in despair but in clarity. London saw this and said, Alina Wyndham is a docile woman. They were wrong. Alina was not docile. Nor was she entirely broken. Alina had done something else. She had drawn her boundaries. Quietly, without asking permission, without needing approval. And within those boundaries, there existed an Alina no one had ever seen. That Alina read books, not only novels but history, philosophy, economics. Volumes brought from her father's library, others ordered from the finest booksellers in London. The library at Wyndham House had already been rich, yet Alina had made it richer still, slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing. That Alina wrote letters, to an old teacher, to a childhood friend, to a distant cousin. Long, honest letters, at times sharp. Letters written in a voice no one in London would have recognized. That Elinor, sitting alone in the garden, among her roses, even in the chill of March, held long conversations with herself. She asked herself questions. What is this marriage? Where is this life going? Who am I within the walls of this house? And more importantly, am I the person I wish to be? The answers were not always clear. But she had not stopped asking the questions. Because Elinor knew this. People who stop asking questions eventually become strangers even to themselves. And she refused to let that happen. Whatever occurred beyond the walls of the house, whatever James did, whatever London might say, at the very least, she wanted to remain honest with herself. It sounds simple, does it not? To remain honest with oneself. But in London, in the year 1811, as the wife of a duke, it was one of the most difficult things in the world. That morning, the morning the maid had pushed the door open, had seen the two silhouettes, the morning the news had spread across 5 drawing rooms, Elinor sat at the breakfast table, and not one single thought passed through her mind. There were many thoughts, and all of them felt strangely calm. First, she was not surprised. That in itself surprised her, her lack of surprise. But looking back, the signs had always been there. The nights James returned late. The mornings he arrived at dawn. The way that woman, Sophia Ashford, looked at him during gatherings. Elinor had seen it all, recorded it, and set it aside because she had not wished to look at it. Now she was looking. Second, she felt no anger. This too was strange. There should have been anger. Society expected it, would have understood it, justified it. But when Elinor searched within herself, she found none. There was pain, yes, dull, worn, exhausted pain. There was disappointment, but that was not new. It had been there for a long time. What was new was something else. Clarity. For the first time, perhaps in years, everything seemed entirely clear. Where she stood, what this was, and what she needed to do. Third, and most importantly, as Elinor stepped into the garden that morning, watering her roses, the early spring cold seeping into her hands, she thought, enough. But that sentence did not mean what most people would assume. It was not an explosion, not a rebellion, not the prelude to tears, shouting, or slammed doors. It was something far quieter and far more dangerous. Sometimes it is the sound of a decision. A real decision. One that comes from within, irreversible, made without asking anyone, without needing permission. Elinor continued watering her roses. With steady hands, a steady face. And somewhere inside her, in a place no one could see, Elinor Wyndham was closing a door. Quietly, decisively, never to open it again. This was the woman London called docile. And that day in that garden among those roses, without knowing it, without seeing it, James Wyndham was committing one of the greatest mistakes of his life. The woman he had misread was no longer allowing herself to be read. London produced gossip. It was the city's most efficient industry, more productive than textiles, the markets, or Parliament itself. A name was enough. A glance. A door opened at the wrong hour. And the machine would begin, grinding, shaping, distributing. The machine had been working on Lady Sophia Ashford for years. And the story it produced was this. Sophia Ashford was the most dangerous woman in London. Beautiful, no one denied it, no one could. Tall, dark, the kind of beauty that turned heads the moment she entered a room. But her true danger was not her beauty. Her true danger was this. Sophia knew what she wanted, and she used every means available to get it. How true was that story? Partly, only partly. And the most dangerous stories are precisely those that are partly true, because they contain enough reality not to be questioned, yet enough absence to destroy a person. Sophia Ashford's real story was far more complex. And that morning, behind that half-open door on the upper floor of Wyndham House, what had happened was nothing like what London believed. One must go back 5 years, to 1806. That year, Sophia Ashford had been engaged to James Wyndham. Not formally, an understanding between families agreed upon but not yet announced. Such arrangements were common in the Regency period. The frame was built first, the painting hung later. But the painting was never hung. James had broken the engagement. Quietly, gently, offering a suitable explanation to the families. The official reason, incompatibility; the unofficial reason, nothing was said. And Sophia had accepted it because she had no choice. In society, when a man broke an engagement, the woman did not protest. She simply continued. Sophia had continued. But something had remained within her. Not quite anger. Not quite hurt. Something deeper. A sense of injustice. And over the years, that feeling had grown silently. 2 years after the broken engagement, Sophia learned something. By chance, unexpectedly. A letter. A letter written by James. But not for himself. For someone else, or rather to protect someone. At the time, there had been a man close to James. Thomas Ellery, a former friend from Cambridge, intelligent and brilliant, but dangerously reckless. Thomas had become entangled in something. Dark matters, debts, gambling, and worse, dealings with the wrong people. By the time James learned of it, Thomas was trapped. Completely. Irreversibly. And if the truth had come to light, Thomas would have been destroyed, not only him but his family. His younger sister. His aging mother. James had written that letter, direct, candid, dangerously honest, to one of those men. Not in Thomas's name, not in his own. But its contents were such that, in the wrong hands, it would not destroy James Wyndham. It would annihilate Thomas Ellery and his entire family. It was a sacrifice. One of the least visible aspects of James's character. When necessary, he could risk everything for someone else, quietly. But silence always had a cost. How had the letter reached Sophia? Even she could not answer that with certainty. In London, some things simply circulated, passed from hand to hand over years. A servant, then another, then a bookseller's shelf, then the possession of someone curious. When Sophia saw the letter, her first feeling was surprise. Then she read it, carefully, slowly, understanding every line. And she realized something. What she held was not merely a letter. It was a key. What door would it open? She considered that question for a long time. A very long time. And then she decided. Sophia Ashford was not wealthy. London either did not know this, or chose to ignore it because her bearing, her dress, her presence suggested otherwise. But the truth was simple. The Ashford family had been quietly declining for years. Her father had made poor investments, like Eleanor's father, but far worse. And after the broken engagement, Sophia had not secured another marriage. Once labeled dangerous, doors in good society closed. Sophia was alone. Truly alone. Her money was diminishing. Her options narrowing. And in her possession, one letter. Had she intended blackmail? She avoided asking herself that question for a long time. Because the answer was both yes and no. Yes, because she saw no other path. No, because Sophia Ashford, whatever else she was, could not bring herself to define herself with that word. But words did not always alter reality. When she went to James, she did not go directly. First, she sent a message, carefully phrased, restrained, stating only that there was a matter requiring discussion. James understood. He was far too perceptive not to. They met. Neutral ground. A neutral hour. Sophia showed him the letter. James's expression did not change. She admired that, though perhaps he could not have changed it even if he wished. But his eyes did something. For a moment, just a moment, they deepened, as though something within him had shifted. "What do you want?" James asked. His voice was flat. "Cold," Sophia told him. "Numbers. Terms. A timeline." James looked at her for a long time. Then he stood. "I will consider it," he said. And he left. He had not thought it through. Or rather, he had thought about it, but had refused to accept it. James Wyndham did not yield to blackmail. It was a matter of character, of pride, and perhaps also of calculation. Once you yielded, it would never end. But he had to retrieve the letter. That was not a choice. Thomas Ellery was still alive, married now, with children, living a respectable life outside London. If that letter came to light, Thomas's life would be destroyed. His family would be destroyed. And that this was a burden James could not carry. He had to see Sophia again. He had devised a plan. A simple one: exchange the letter for something else. Not money, because once you began paying, it would never stop. Something else, something Sophia truly needed. To find that, he would have to understand her. And James had realized something. He had never understood Sophia. Not even when they had been engaged. That morning, the one the maid had witnessed, the one the gossip had carried in every direction, James Wyndham had been in his room with Sophia Ashford. But not in the way London imagined. Sophia sat in a chair. James stood by the window. There were 3 steps between them, and those 3 steps felt far greater. They were speaking, not in whispers, not in closeness, not in the way London would have pictured. It was a cold, tense, calculated conversation. "You will not give me the letter," James said. It was not a question. "No," Sophia replied evenly. "Then what do you truly want?" Sophia looked at him for a moment. And then, unexpectedly, in a way that surprised even James, something in her eyes broke. A small thing, almost imperceptible. But James saw it. "I want to leave London," she said. Her voice trembled for the first time, then steadied. "A house. Small. Outside the city. And enough money, not more, just enough. If you provide that, I will burn the letter." James remained silent. "That is all," Sophia added. And there was something in her voice James had not expected: fatigue. A weariness similar to a leaner S, yet different, sharper, more openly wounded. "In this city," she continued, "every morning I wake knowing what I am. The dangerous woman. The one whose engagement was broken. The one who crosses boundaries. London defines me with these words, and I am drowning inside them. I cannot leave because I have no money. I stay because I have no choice. This letter, yes, I considered using it. But I do not want to become someone who blackmails James." It was the first time she had used his name. "I only want to leave." James did not speak for a long time. He looked out the window, the morning in London slowly unfolding, the first movements beginning in the streets. And a thought formed in his mind. He had misread her. For years. Like everyone else. Sophia Ashford was not dangerous. She was cornered. And people who are cornered sometimes throw the only stone they have, because they have nothing else left. He was about to answer, yes or no. He did not yet know which word would leave his mouth when the door opened slightly. Betsy, 16, newly employed, come to light the fireplaces. 1 second. 1 glance. But that second was enough. And London required only a few hours to carry that moment from 5 drawing rooms to 10, and then across the entire city. That day, James had not been able to give Sophia an answer. Sophia had risen calmly, gathered her shawl and walked to the door. When she turned, she looked at James, briefly measured. "I will not burn the letter," she said. "Not yet. But I do not wish to harm anyone. I will give you 3 days, James. 3 days to think." And she left. James remained alone in the room. Morning light filtered slowly through the window, dust motes suspended in the air, the city waking below. And at that moment, precisely that moment, the heaviest question for James Wyndham was not, "How will I retrieve the letter?" The heaviest question was this: had Elena heard? And if she had, and she had, the city already knew, what did she think? He wanted to know. Perhaps for the first time. Truly for the first time. What did Elena think? But downstairs in the garden among the roses, Elena Wyndham had already thought, and already decided. And that decision was moving in a direction James could not have imagined. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The drawing room at Wyndham House was usually empty at that hour. The rush of the morning had passed, the preparations of evening had not yet begun, and the city seemed to pause, as if catching its breath. The curtains were half drawn, the pale March sunlight stretching long rectangles across the carpet, and from outside came, now and then, the distant sound of a carriage. Elena sat by the window. A book rested in her hands, as always. But she was not reading. She was thinking, or rather, reviewing her plan. Because when she had returned from the garden that morning, walking calmly, drying her hands, still carrying the scent of soil from her roses, something had clarified in her mind. Like a fogged glass suddenly wiped clean. She knew what she would do. The question was how. And for that she needed one thing: to speak with Sophia Ashford. Most people would have been surprised by such a decision. Perhaps even amused. The Duke's wife will go to her rival. But for Elena, it was not surprising. It was logical. Because Elena knew this. To understand any story, one must understand every person within it, not only from one's own perspective, but from all of theirs. This was the instinct she had cultivated for years, the fundamental rule of her invisible ledger. She did not yet know who Sophia Ashford truly was. She knew only the version London told. And no one understood better than Elena how incomplete London's stories were, because London had misread her for years as well. She had sent a message earlier that day. Short, direct, without hiding behind polite conventions. "Lady Ashford, if you are available this afternoon, I would receive you for tea. Elena Wyndham." The reply came within an hour. Equally brief. 2 o'clock. Essay. When Sophia entered, Elena was waiting. She had risen, this mattered. A hostess could receive a guest while seated. It would be a subtle assertion of power. Elena stood. She wanted equal ground. Neither superiority nor submission, only 2 people, level with one another. Sophia noticed. She paused for a moment at the door, perhaps searching for the scene she had expected. An angry face. A tense voice. Perhaps a slap, perhaps tears, perhaps a cold politeness masking resentment. She found none of it. Only Elena. Calm. Upright. Eyes open. "Lady Ashford," Elena said. "Please." Tea was brought. The servant left. The door closed. The two women faced one another. Sophia did not speak first. She was waiting for the accusation, the attack, everything London expected of such a moment. She held her cup, did not drink. Elena lifted hers, took a sip, set it down, and then without preamble, in a steady voice she asked, "How much do you know about the letter?" Sophia blinked. "Enough. Do you know Thomas Ellery?" "No. But when you read the letter, you understood what it concerned." Sophia paused. "Yes." Elena inclined her head slightly, measuring, considering. "Then you also understand this," she said. "If that letter is exposed, it will not destroy James Wyndham. It will destroy someone else. Someone innocent." Sophia's fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her cup. "Did you invite me here to explain that?" "No," Elena replied. "You already knew it. I came to tell you something else." Sophia was waiting. Elena rose slowly without haste. She walked to the window, looked outside, the garden, the gray sky, the uncertain air of March. And she spoke. Her back turned, but her voice clear. "For a long time in this city, I have been observing something," she said. "What women do when they are cornered. Some yield. Some fight, but with the weapons London approves of, according to rules London has set. And some throw the only stone they have." She turned, looked at Sophia. "You are about to throw your stone. I understand. You are cornered. It seems as though you have no other path, and that letter appears to be your only way out." Sophia's jaw tightened. "What would you do in my place?" "Something different," Elena said. "That is why I asked you here." Silence. Sophia set her cup down. Her eyes narrowed, assessing the woman, the room, this strange conversation. This was not what she had expected. Not at all. "Why?" she asked at last. Her tone was flat, but beneath it lay a real question. "Why would you want to help me?" "I am James's." "I know what you are," Elena said. She did not interrupt, she completed the thought. "And it is not important to me. What matters is this: you hold a letter. If you use it, an innocent family will be destroyed. If you do not, you remain trapped. You are caught between these two outcomes. And you are offering a third." There was a thin edge of irony in Sophia's voice, but also genuine curiosity. "Yes," Elena said. She sat opposite of her. Close. Direct. Her eyes steady. "But first, tell me this. What do you truly want? Not from James. Not from this city. For yourself, what do you truly want?" This was not the question Sophia had expected. No one had ever asked her that. Not in years. Everyone had told her what to do, what not to do, what she was. But no one had sat across from her and asked, "What do you want?" And for that reason, unexpectedly, unwillingly, in a way she would never have permitted even to herself, Sophia Ashford's eyes filled with tears. She did not hide them. She could not. There was a long silence. Sophia looked at the window, then at the table, then at her hands. And finally, in a low voice, almost as if speaking to herself, she said, "I want to leave. This city. This name. This story." Sophia Ashford, the Sophia Ashford London knows. The dangerous woman. The broken engagement. The one watched in every room. She paused. "I simply want to go somewhere no one knows me. A small house. Perhaps a garden. My books. Enough money, not more, just enough. And silence. Real silence, free of gossip, free of the past. She lifted her eyes, looked at Eleanor. Is that foolish? Eleanor shook her head. No, she said. It is not. Then Eleanor spoke. At length, openly, holding nothing back, something unusual for her. Eleanor valued silence, measured her words. But that afternoon in that room, before that woman, she did not measure them. I have a network, she said. One London does not see. I built it over 3 years, here, in this house, in this city, by remaining invisible. No one notices whom I speak to, because docile Eleanor speaks to no one, does she? But I do. Lawyers, notaries, sometimes the most unexpected people. Sophia listened, almost holding her breath. Through that network, Eleanor continued, I can take you out of London. There is a small property in Kent, available, modest, unremarkable. I will provide part of the money myself, without James's knowledge, in my own name. This is not charity. It is an agreement. What agreement? Sophia asked. Her voice no longer trembled. It had sharpened. You burned the letter, Eleanor said. Here, in this room. Now. And I will secure the deed to that property and enough money for you. Within a month you leave London. And you do not return. Sophia looked at her for a long time. Does James know of this? No. Why not? It is his problem, his letter. Because, Eleanor said, and for the first time her voice softened almost to a whisper, this is my decision. Not in James's name. In my own. Because I will not allow one woman to destroy another in this city, no matter the cause. Not because of James. Not because of that letter. Not for anything. She paused. And because, she continued even more quietly, I understand you, Lady Ashford. I understand the corner. I understand that feeling. And I understand why you believe the only way out is to throw the stone in your hand. But it is not. Sophia did not speak for a long time. She sat still, hands resting on the table, eyes fixed on Eleanor, trying to read her, to understand the calculation. Because Sophia had lived in London long enough to know everything had a price. Nothing was given freely. What do you gain? She asked at last. Direct. Hard. You save James. You save me. You save that innocent family. And you. What does this give you? Eleanor smiled. Slightly. Briefly. But it was real. Freedom, she said. Sophia frowned. She did not understand. As long as that letter exists, Eleanor explained, this marriage is a cage. James's secret becomes my chain. And I do not choose to remain chained. Not to James, not to this scandal, not to this story. If we make this agreement, the letter burns. The secret disappears. And I leave that cage. Not through James's decision, not through his regret, but through my own. Do you understand? Sophia did. The fire was burning. A small, steady flame, lit against the chill of March, quietly alive in the corner. Sophia rose. From her bag she drew it out, the envelope carefully folded, aged but intact. The letter inside. She held it for a moment. Eleanor watched. She did not speak. Did not press. She simply waited, patient, calm as always. And Sophia Ashford, the dangerous woman of London, cornered, misread, misjudged, walked to the fireplace. She held the envelope to the flame. The fire caught at the edge first, then spread slowly, steadily. The paper curled, darkened, shrank. and the letter James Wyndham had written 5 years earlier, risking everything for a friend, turned from pale to amber, from amber to black, to ash. Sophia withdrew her hand, turned back. The two women looked at one another. And in that look, no words were needed, no explanation required. Something passed between them. What does it mean to be understood? Truly, completely, beyond all the false labels and borrowed stories. It was that look. Before she left, Sophia paused at the door, turned back. "Why Elena?" she asked. This time not Lady Wyndham, just her name. "Why truly? Not for me, you did not know me. Not for James, you say. For that innocent family." Elena considered. She wanted to be honest, because this moment required honesty. Because, she said, someone somewhere has to do the right thing. She paused. And if we wait for London, that someone will never appear. Sophia left. The door closed. Elena remained alone in the room. The fire still burned, quieter now, lower, the ashes of the letter already indistinguishable among the others. She sat for a long time. Then she rose, went to her desk, sat down, took a sheet of paper. She wrote a name, Solicitor Hargrove. Beneath it a note, "I wish to see you tomorrow morning. A personal matter. Urgent." She signed it, not Elena Wyndham. Elena Ashby. Her maiden name. The name she had carried before the marriage. A small thing. Perhaps no one would notice. Perhaps it meant nothing. But to Elena it meant everything. Because Elena Wyndham was the product of an arrangement. A part of a contract. A shadow beneath a title. Elena Ashby. Elena Ashby was something else. She was herself. That night when James returned to the house, later than ever, as though he had walked for hours through the darkness of London, the table was once again not set. But this time it was different. Because there was something on the table. A small thing. An envelope. On it a single word. James. He opened it. Inside 2 lines. "The letter is burned. You owe nothing to anyone. But this is not for me. It is an opportunity for you to be honest with yourself. Whether you use it or not is your choice." There was no signature. But James knew. He stood at the table for a long time, holding the envelope empty, light, meaningless in itself. But the words within it were heavy. Too heavy to carry. "The letter is burned." How? Who? When? These questions felt secondary now. The primary question, the only one that mattered, was this. Why had Elena done it? It was near midnight. Wyndham House was silent. The servants had withdrawn, the candles extinguished, even the city, that restless, ceaseless city, seemed to pause at this hour. A distant sound now and then, a dog, a horse's hoof, the wind against the roof. Not the sound of the city, but of the night. Something entirely different. James was still at the table. He had set the envelope aside, then returned to it, gone upstairs, come back down, read it again. 2 lines. Only 2 lines. Yet they turned in his mind for hours, like a wheel, relentless. The letter is burned. An opportunity to be honest with yourself. He read that phrase again and again. And each time, he felt something he could not fully name. Shame. Partly. Gratitude. Perhaps, but that word felt wrong because gratitude implied hierarchy. One gives, the other receives, and this was not that. It was something more equal. Something heavier. Perhaps the closest word was this. To be seen. For the first time in his life, James Wyndham felt that someone had truly seen him. Entirely. Through all his failures, all his omissions, all those years of quiet neglect, someone had seen him. And what that person offered him was not kindness, but something simpler, more exacting. Be honest with yourself. That was Eleanor. That was her voice. And James realized, late, far too late, that he had never known that voice. 3 years in the same house, at the same table in the same corridors, and he had never heard it. Because he had never wanted to. Now he did. He rose. He climbed the stairs, slowly, heavily, each step feeling as though it carried more weight than the last. First floor. Second floor. The corridor. His room to the left, Eleanor S to the right. He stopped. The door was closed. No light seeped beneath it. Either she had extinguished the candle or she was asleep. At this hour, sleep would be natural, expected. He raised his hand. Hesitated. How many times had he done this? Stood in this corridor before this door, lifted his hand and then lowered it. How many times had he turned away, telling himself, not yet, I do not know what to say. But tonight was different. Tonight he held something, the 2 lines, the small envelope, that voice Eleanor had used for him. And he understood, if he turned away tonight, he would turn away tomorrow. And the day after, until there was nowhere left to return to. He knocked. 3 times. Lightly but with resolve. Silence. Then a sound from within. Footsteps. And the door opened. Eleanor stood in the doorway. She had not been asleep. A light shawl lay over her nightdress, her hair, usually so carefully arranged, fell loose over her shoulders. A book in her hand, her finger marking the page. She had been reading. She looked at him. She was not surprised. That too was something. As though somewhere within her, she had anticipated this moment. Or if not anticipated, she had been prepared. Eleanor was always prepared. James was not. He understood that now, standing at this door beneath her calm gaze. He did not know what to say, how to begin. All the thoughts he had carried, all the sentences he had rehearsed, scattered. He simply looked at her. And Eleanor, without expectation, without demand, opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. The room was not small, but that night it felt so. Perhaps it was the light, a single candle, illuminating only the space between them, leaving the rest in shadow. Perhaps it was the awareness itself. James realized with a quiet shock that he had never been here before. 3 years. And he had never known what lay beyond this door. He looked around. Briefly. Instinctively. Books. Many books on shelves stacked on the table, left open on a chair. A dried branch of flowers by the window, perhaps from the garden. A small painting on the wall, a stormy sea. Papers, ink, a writing desk. Eleanor's world. 3 years under the same roof, and he had known none of it. Eleanor watched him. Her book now resting on the table, her posture open. Not defensive, simply open. Waiting. James turned back to her. "I received the envelope," he said. His voice was steady. He was not. "I know," Eleanor replied. "You spoke with Sophia." "Yes." He took a step forward. Stopped. How, he could not finish. "I sent a message," she said. "She came. We spoke." "What did you speak about?" Eleanor inclined her head slightly, that familiar gesture, thoughtful, measured. "The things 2 women can speak about," she said. "James, Sophia Ashford is not dangerous. She is simply cornered." James's jaw tightened. What did she tell you? Did she? She did nothing to me, Alina said. Her voice remained calm, not sharp but firm, carrying something new within it. And she did not need to. Because I offered her a choice. What choice? A way out. James waited. Alina explained briefly, clearly, without excess. The property in Kent. The money. The terms of the agreement. He listened. And as he listened, two opposing feelings grew within him. First, relief. The letter was gone. Thomas was safe. A danger that had lasted years had been resolved in a single afternoon. Second, weight. Because Alina had done this. Not him. While he had been planning, calculating, circling the problem, Alina had solved it. Quietly, without asking, in her own way. Where did you find the money? He asked softly. My own, Alina said. My father left me a small inheritance when I married. Technically, I cannot spend it without your knowledge, but I did. I want you to know that. Another man might have been angered. Might have said, this is my matter, why act without permission? But James was not that man tonight, or at least, he did not wish to be. And what he felt was not anger. Why tell me, he asked. I would not have known. Alina did not blink. Because, she said, the greatest problem between us was never the secret James. Not the letter. Not Sophia Ashford. She paused. It was the silence. And I am no longer silent. The sentence lingered in the room. James could not speak. Because it was true, and hearing the truth sometimes left a person silent. Not an empty silence, but one that overflowed. There was much to say, yet none of it wished to come first. Alina walked to the window. She did not turn her back on him. She turned as she reached it, leaning lightly against the wall, standing where she could still see him. Her shawl had slipped slightly from her shoulders. She did not adjust it. I want to ask you something, she said. I want an honest answer. You will not grow angry, you will not defend yourself, you will not explain, you will simply answer. Can you do that? James exhaled. Ask. Alina looked at him. Directly. Calmly. With that familiar depth. What does this marriage mean to you? James had not expected that question. Or rather, he had not expected it in this form. He had anticipated questions about the scandal. About Sophia. About that morning. About plans, the future, perhaps even separation. But this question, simple, immense, unavoidable, had never occurred to him. What does this marriage mean to you? He wanted to answer immediately, reflexively, with careful, measured words. But Alina had said, no defense. And that constraint strangely freed him. Because without defense, without explanation, what remained? The truth. James drew a slow breath. At the beginning, he said quietly, it was an arrangement. You knew it, I knew it, everyone knew it. I did not choose you, that is true. I decided without knowing you, that is also true. He paused, then continued. But then something happened. Without my noticing. Without my intending it. Alina waited. She did not speak. She was listening, truly listening, and James could feel it. That kind of listening was rare. When you began asking questions at the table, he said. Those small questions. About Parliament. About whether I was tired. Those questions. He let the sentence hang. What about them? Alina asked, her voice even. They unsettled me, James said. And hearing it aloud, he recognized how wrong it sounded. But understand it correctly. Discomfort sometimes comes from what one is not accustomed to. I was not accustomed to being truly wondered about, to someone sitting across from me not merely to exist, but to see. And you withdrew, Elinor said. No judgment, only observation. And I withdrew, James answered. Silence. A long silence. But this time it was different. Not heavy with unspoken things, not layered and suffocating. It was lighter, as though two people had set down a weight they had carried for too long. The weight remained, visible, present, but it had been released. And sometimes, even that was enough to breathe. Elinor adjusted her shawl. Slowly. Then she looked at him, and this look was different. Less composed. Less measured. There was something beneath it. Fatigue, yes, but something else. Fragility, perhaps. Seeing that in Elinor felt unfamiliar to James. He had never seen it before. But now it was there. Unhidden. James, she said. She used his name. Soft, natural, but heavy. Let me tell you something. James waited. When I entered this marriage 3 years ago, I carried something with me. Not hope exactly, I was too realistic for that. But a kind of openness. Perhaps this might work. Perhaps this man and I could build something, in time. Small things. A conversation at the table. An exchange about a book one evening. Perhaps, one day, we would pass each other in this corridor and not feel like strangers. She paused. Her eyes remained on him. I closed that openness. Not in a day, slowly, a little more each time. As you closed your door, I closed mine. And now, her voice did not break, but it trembled faintly, almost imperceptibly. Now I do not know where that openness is. Whether it still exists somewhere I have hidden it, or whether it is truly gone. James took a step forward, then stopped. He did not want to come too close. This was her space, her room, her moment. But remaining entirely distant felt wrong as well. Would you want to know, he asked quietly, whether it is still there? Elinor looked at him. For a long time. I want to know, she said. But wanting to know does not mean I must continue. I need you to understand that. I understand. No, Elinor said. And the word was sharp, clear, not angry but firm. Not yet. If you did, you would know this. When I sat with Sophia Ashford today, when I had that letter burned, I did not do it for you. Not to save this marriage. Not to escape society's gossip. Then why? Elinor thought before answering. Truly thought. Because it was right, she said at last. Simply right. And from now on, I will only do what is right. Not because I owe you. Not because I owe society. Because I owe it to myself. She paused. This was my decision. Perhaps my first real one. And every decision after this will be the same. James could not speak for a long time. Because what she had said, simple, immense, had broken something within him. Not in a destructive way. Breaking did not always mean collapse. Sometimes, what broke was the thing that had kept a person frozen. The cage itself. James Wyndham, 34 years old, heir to 8 generations, royal advisor, stood there in that small room under a single candle, and for the first time in his life became smaller. And strangely, this did not crush him. On the contrary, it felt as though the weight he had carried, the title, the expectations, the chain, had loosened. Only slightly. But even that slight loosening allowed him to breathe. Elinor, he said, his voice low. She waited. I owe you many things. I know that, and I will not pretend I can repay them. But, he stopped. The word was wrong. Debt was wrong. She did not want debt, calculation, exchange. He began again. 3 years ago, I did not see you. That is true. I withdrew, that is also true. And you kept trying to keep your door open all that time. And each time I walked past it. Elena remained silent. And today, despite everything you have done, for me, without asking, without expecting, I am still here. At your door. Still. I know, Elena said. Is that enough? James asked. And the question, bare, vulnerable, uncertain, sounded different in the room. Softer. Fragile. Elena looked at him. For a long time. Then, it is not enough, she said. Her voice was calm, not cruel but clear. Not yet. She paused. But it may be a beginning. That night James left Elena's room. Nothing was resolved. Nothing was clean or complete. There was no tidy ending of the kind London preferred. Two people had spoken. Two people had, perhaps for the first time, truly heard one another. And that hearing, raw, exhausting, unguarded, left them both lighter and heavier at once. The corridor was silent. James reached his own door. He stopped. He did not turn back. But that night, for the first time, he slept. Deeply. Without dreams. A sleep that settled into his bones. As though he had set something down. He did not yet know what. But he had set it down. And Elena, in her room, before extinguishing the candle, picked up her book. Found her place, marked by her finger. Read a paragraph. Then another. Then she closed the book. Closed her eyes. And for the first time, in a very, very long time, she slept without wondering what tomorrow would bring. London spoke of everything. It was the city's oldest habit, to seize events, chew them over, digest them, cast them aside, and move on to the next. London's memory was not long, on the contrary, it was painfully short. Today's scandal grew stale by tomorrow. This week's shock faded beneath next week's gossip. The city functioned like that. A machine that constantly renewed itself, constantly consumed, never truly paused. The Wyndham scandal passed in the same way. It was intensely discussed for a week. Less so the second. By the end of the third, another name had taken its place. A countess, a diplomat, a midnight escape. London had found new bones to chew. The Wyndhams had been pushed aside. But inside Wyndham House, behind those stone walls, away from London's gaze, something continued to change. Slowly, silently, unnoticed. The first change was small. So small that even the servants did not understand it at first. One morning, about 10 days after the scandal, James came down to breakfast earlier than usual. This was unusual. He normally arrived late, the tea already cold, the toast stale, and he would eat without noticing. But that morning he came early. And Elena was still at the table. Two people met at the same table. This was not new. It had happened every day for 3 years. But this time James sat. Truly sat, without haste, without searching for a reason to leave, without preparing his escape. He sat and asked for tea. Elena looked at him. Briefly. James looked at her. A little longer. The weather seems fair today, he said. His voice faltered slightly, the hesitation of speaking something unfamiliar. Elena glanced toward the window. Yes, she said. But it will likely cloud over in the afternoon. How can you tell? The smell of the morning air, Elena replied. It feels damp. That usually means rain later. James did not know this. He had lived in London for years. He knew its weather, but not as Eleanor did. Not by scent. Did you teach yourself that? He asked. The garden did, Eleanor said. There was a brief silence at the table, but it was different from the silences before. It was not heavy. It carried no burden. It was simply a moment between two people. Then James drank his tea. Eleanor ate her toast. And neither of them rose. They remained until breakfast ended. That was all. But in Wyndham House, that morning, it was everything. The second change was larger. A week later, after dinner, as James moved toward his study, he stopped. As he always did at the door, but this time he did not enter. He turned back, crossed the corridor, went to Eleanor's sitting room, the smaller room filled with books. Eleanor was there, reading. James knocked, though the door was open. A polite, unnecessary but correct gesture. Eleanor looked up. "May I?" he asked. She regarded him for a moment. "No," she said, meaning no objection. She kept her place in the book, not wishing to lose it, but her attention was on him. James entered, sat opposite of her. For a time neither spoke. But the silence was not strange. It breathed, as though even silence could carry warmth. Then James spoke. "What are you reading?" Eleanor showed him the cover. He looked philosophy. Serious, demanding, not the sort most men expected a lady to read. "Is it not heavy?" he asked, not as criticism but with genuine curiosity. "It is," Eleanor said. "But the best books are. You carry them, set them down, return to them. Each time you see something different." James considered this. "I cannot read that way," he said. "I want to finish. To reach the end." "I know," Eleanor replied. And then very slightly she smiled. "It suits you." James smiled as well. Small, unfamiliar, but real. That night he remained in that room for 2 hours. They spoke not only of the book but of other things. Parliament, a matter of land, a memory from James's childhood, which surprised even him that it had surfaced. Eleanor listened, truly listened. And as James spoke, he realized he could not remember the last time someone had listened to him like that. The third change, the most important, came when no one expected it. Late March. One evening the house was full. James's associates, 2 families, a routine dinner gathering. Eleanor was in her usual role, hostess. Perfect, quiet, precise. Midway through the meal, a discussion arose at the far end of the table. 2 men, one a member of Parliament, the other a landowner, debated economics. Their voices did not rise, but tension was clear. Eleanor was listening. And at a certain moment, unexpectedly, even to herself, she spoke. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was calm, but the table heard. "I do not agree with Sir Pemberton." The table stilled. Women did not enter such discussions, not by rule, not in writing, but in practice. Everyone knew it. And Eleanor Wyndham had never challenged it. Until that evening. She continued on economics, on land taxes, clear, informed, unapologetic. 2 sentences. 3. 5. The table listened. Then Sir Pemberton, an older man, proud, rarely admitting fault, laughed. Genuinely. Unexpectedly. "Lady Wyndham is correct," he said. "I must concede it." The tension dissolved. Conversation resumed. And James, across the table, unseen, looked at Eleanor. She felt it. Turned. Their eyes met. James said nothing. He did not need to. But in his gaze, in those gray eyes, always controlled, always distant, there was something Alina had never seen before. She struggled to name it. Then she recognized it. Admiration. April came. London awakened with spring. Trees turned green, parks filled. The season resumed its pace. Balls, invitations, gatherings. The city moved, as it always did. And the Wyndham couple were different. No one could quite say how. There was no visible change, no grand gesture, no dramatic moment, nothing that would draw attention. Yet it was felt. Something subtle, instinctive in the air when they entered a room. Before they had stood side by side, yet apart. Now they stood side by side and faced the same direction. A small difference. But sometimes, small differences are the only ones that matter. Sophia Ashford left London. At the beginning of May. Quietly. Without announcement. Unusual for her, but perhaps that was what change meant. Doing what was not expected. She went to Kent. A small house. A garden, as Alina had said. Books. And silence. True silence. London spoke of her for a few days. Has Sophia Ashford left? Where? Why? But when no answers came, it moved on. London knew how to let go. Perhaps that was its greatest skill. Sophia, meanwhile, one morning, sitting in her garden in the softer air of Kent, so unlike London with no one around her, thought, for the first time. Perhaps here I can be myself. She only thought it. She did not yet know. But thinking was a beginning. And beginnings are the most valuable part of everything. Thomas Ellery never learned. He knew the letter had existed, but that it had been burned, reduced to ash in a London fireplace one afternoon, decided upon by two women in a quiet room, he never knew. Outside London, in a small town, he continued his life with his family. Sometimes, rarely, at random moments, he thought of James Wyndham, his old friend from Cambridge, a man who had withdrawn from his life without explanation. And when he thought of James, he felt a strange sense of gratitude. He did not know why, but he felt it. Sometimes gratitude existed without knowledge. That too was a kind of gift. June. The roses in the garden of Wyndham House were in full bloom. The roses Alina had tended for 3 years, watered, pruned in the cold of early mornings. Pink and red, and in one corner a single white bloom, separate from the others. That morning, Alina was in the garden, as she was every morning. But this time, James was there too. He had come out through the back door, a cup of tea in his hand, without his coat, informal, seen in a way the public never saw him. The early sun touched the garden, the stones still cool, the air carrying the sharp, fresh scent of roses. Alina turned. She was not surprised. James approached. Stopped. Looked at the roses. Which is the most beautiful? He asked. A simple question. Perhaps unnecessary. But unnecessary questions were sometimes the truest ones. Alina looked at the roses. Truly thought. That one, she said at last, indicating the white bloom in the corner. Why? Because it blooms where no one sees, Alina said. Not for anyone. It simply blooms. James looked at that rose. For a long time. Then he turned to her. He wanted to say something, he felt it, the words waiting, but Alina spoke first. I know, she said softly. Know what? What you wish to say. James paused. And Alina looked at the rose. Then at him. And in that look, familiar now, readable, there was something new. Not a door. A window. A door could open or close. A window could be seen through, from both sides. And she said, "It is still early." Early. Yes, Elinor said. But early does not mean impossible. James remained in the garden that morning. Elinor watered the roses. James drank his tea. They spoke at times, sometimes of important matters, sometimes of nothing at all. A bird landed nearby. They both noticed. A cloud passed before the sun. Both saw it. Small things. Only small things. The greatest transformations did not occur in loud moments, but in quiet ones. Shouting and slammed doors made scenes, but scenes were not change. Change was this: two people in the same garden, breathing the same morning air, looking at the same rose, and finding it natural in a way it had never been before. London would never see it. Because London sought the dramatic, the scandal, the spectacle, the tears, the quarrels. Without those, there was no story to tell. But this was the real story. Two people, a garden, roses, and the long, layered distance between them, slowly, stubbornly dissolving morning by morning. That autumn, something happened. A small thing. Yet the greatest things often appear small at first. One evening in his study, James wrote something. A name. Then a question. The next morning, he went to Elinor's sitting room. Knocked. Entered. Elinor looked at him. James handed her the paper. She took it. Read. There were two things written on it. First, a project. Something planned for one of James's estates. A small community initiative, perhaps a school, perhaps a charitable house. It was not yet defined. Beneath it, I would value your thoughts. Second, and this was different, written by hand, apart from the formal tone, one sentence. There is no one whose judgment I trust more than yours. Elinor held the paper, looked at it for a moment. Then she lifted her gaze, met his. And in that look, in the gaze that had measured everything, recorded everything, hidden itself for years, something opened. Small but real. That window. Sit, she said. Let us discuss it. London spoke of other things that winter. Other scandals, other names, other doors. Its machine turned, consumed, moved on. The Wyndhams lived quietly. It was not a grand love story, not in the way London understood such things. There were no tearful reunions, no dramatic confessions, no scenes of collapse and forgiveness. Instead, there were these: morning breakfasts, growing longer, growing less silent. Evenings in the reading room, sometimes each with their own book, sometimes one reading while the other listened, sometimes no books at all. Walks in the garden, at first Elinor alone, then James occasionally, then habitually. Discussions. Real discussions, disagreements, differing views, moments when one told the other, "You are mistaken." But within them was something new, respect. Two people taking one another seriously. A small thing, perhaps, but absent in most marriages. And sometimes, rare, private moments unseen by anyone, James would laugh at something Elinor said. A brief, genuine laugh. And Elinor would watch it, the laugh she had never seen before, and feel something settle within her. Trust, perhaps. Hope, perhaps. Or something quieter, steadier than both. Recognition. And Elinor. Elinor Wyndham changed that year. But not in the way London would expect. Not brighter, not more dramatic, not visibly happier. The change came from within. She continued to speak, at the table in gatherings when necessary. She used silence not as a weapon, but as a choice. When she chose not to speak, she did not. When she chose to speak, she did. And that difference, small, immense, altered the texture of her life. She continued visiting her solicitor, Hargrove, punctual and reliable, acting in her own name, for her own decisions. James knew now. And one day he said, "If there is any arrangement made in your name, tell me as well. Let us decide together." Elinor looked at him. Together? Yes. A brief silence. "That is a new word," she said. "I know," James replied. "I am learning." And that was it. The essence of everything, the pages, the scenes, the silences, the words, came down to a single word. Learning. People can change, but only under one condition, when they are seen. Truly seen. In their faults, their fears, the heavy armor they have carried for years. James had been seen. By Elinor. But that was not merely Elinor's gift, it was her courage. Because seeing was easy. Remaining after seeing, that required courage. And Elinor Wyndham had been many things in her life. But most of all, most deeply, most truly, she was brave. When winter came, the garden of Wyndham House slept. The roses were cut back, the earth frozen, the white rose dormant like the others. But its roots remained, hidden beneath the soil, unseen, yet present. And when spring returned, as it always did, even if late, it would bloom again. Not for anyone. Simply because it could. London spoke of many things that year. But within Wyndham House, within that garden, those breakfasts, those quiet rooms, there lived a story that would never be told. Because the truest stories are never told. They are lived. Quietly, patiently, a little more each day. And that precisely that is what endures. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If you are still here, we would truly love to know where you are watching from. Reading your comments is one of the most meaningful parts of this journey for us. And if you would like to hear more stories like this, told with the same care and depth, consider subscribing to the channel.